Morning, everybody. So glad that you could join us on this Monday morning. We were talking about how it is mid-March, and so many people are on spring break and maybe watching this in recorded version. So we're so glad that you were able to be here in person. My name is Betsy Lozega, and I'm from the Florida PBIS project. And today's technical assistance chat is going to be on high school PBIS. And you are going to be joined by the lovely Dr. Lauren Ivanovich and Dr. Stephanie Martinez, who are going to be sharing their expertise in high school PBIS. I'm really excited to hear their presentation, and I'm so glad that you guys were able to join us today. So I am going to hand it over to the two of them.
All right. Thank you, Betsy. And I hate to break it to you, Betsy, it's Tuesday morning.
Oh my gosh. Sorry, I took yesterday off, so it felt like a
It's
Sunday.
it's your Monday.
But
Yeah.
you know what? That's good for all of you because your
Yeah.
week just got shorter.
um, just kidding with you, Betsy. Good morning, everyone. I'm Lauren. I am one of the technical assistance specialists for the Florida PBIS project and joined today by Stephanie Martinez, also a TA specialist for the Florida PBIS project. And we're really excited to get to share with you about high school PBIS implementation and kind of those intricacies and pieces that fall within high school implementation. So I'm going to really quickly go over the objectives for us for today. And then Stephanie's going to kind of break it into a new format of norms that we're going to do. So objectives, we're hoping that through today, you will be able to identify one strategy, just one, hopefully more than one, but at least you'll take away one that can be used for teaming, faculty commitment, teaching expectations and rules, recognizing students and discipline systems, and all within that high school setting. And we know that that can be a unique area, so we wanted to make sure that we focus on that. What we hope is that by the end of this TA chat, either here live or recorded, that you will identify one strategy that you want to take back and try to implement in your school or within your district.
Thanks, Lauren. We are going to try a new format today called Echo. And with Echo, it is something that our colleagues at the Behavioral Alliance of South Carolina have introduced. And Lauren and I got the opportunity to participate in one of those. And we thought it was such a great way to get people to share and participate and be engaged. So we wanted to try that method today. So these are the norms for Echo. So participate, that's a big one. So we're going to start with practicing our participation today. As we mentioned that there are some districts that are on spring break today. So as I'm going over the norms, if you wouldn't mind in the chat box, thinking back to when you were in high school, and if you are on spring break, what is one thing you would do? If you could put that in the chat box and then let us know if you're a district person, which district you're from, and if you're a school person, which school you're from. So to start that participation going. So again, we're going to put in, if you're back in high school again, what would you do during spring break? And if you're from a district you're from, if you're a school, which school you're from. So one of the big ones is participation. The other part is collaboration. And so we're going to be doing some collaboration at the end. So some of you have microphone access, some of you don't. But if you do have microphone access, then we're going to go through that part of it. And if not, then you can just use in the chat box. And then communicate. So again, kind of along the same type of lines of that. We're going to use the technology for some communication. Feel free to put yourself on mute if you need to, and then just give us some honest feedback when we get to that piece. So with that, I'm seeing a lot of sleeping in, going to the beach or lake, and hanging out with friends. So keep them coming. Again, feel free to think back because we're going to do a lot of collaboration today.
And there was a question about the chat or with the slides for today, and Therese just put them in the chat again for you. So, and I think Betsy probably can put those in a couple more times as we go through. I know it always is kind of funky when you join Zoom. So, All right, so we are going to continue that collaboration piece with a quick intro activity. So what we would love for you to do is in the chat box or unmute if you would prefer. Just do the raise hand feature so that way we can know who wants to talk in that order. That would be really helpful for us. So if you want to unmute and talk, just do that raise the hand feature. And what you're going to say is your name and your district, and then 2 to 3 words that describe your knowledge about PBIS implementation specific to the high school. And so you see that example from Stephanie, and hers is always learning. So is there anyone who would like to unmute and start us off? Or you can go ahead and put it in the chat box and we'll read those out as well. So again, this is a participation one. It's a little bit different than some of our other TA chats that we've done. As Stephanie described, we're trying this ECHO model from the Behavior Alliance of South Carolina to try to get some more engagement within our TA chat.
I can go.
Yeah, go right ahead.
And I apologize, I don't have my screen on, but my name is Teresa Kogar, and I'm actually from the Autism Center for Education in Virginia.
Awesome.
We're part of the RRTC, but I worked at TTAC in our state, and I was a long time PBIS facilitator for the state of Virginia, and still very much in schools in my role as an autism education specialist, do the same thing. PBIS is my first love. And so anyway, I'm going beyond what PBIS. I apologize. So
That's okay.
so that's my name. And really, as far as high school, I've always been intrigued. For me, it's, and I hate to, I'm going to tag on Stephanie and use the word always, but mine is always trying to help. I just always, so many different things happening at the high school level, and we're going to have these conversations, but just always trying to help. Okay, so what's the reinforcement? What's the motivation? Things change as we get older. So just because I learned something back in the day doesn't mean it's still there. So just really working on, always trying to help those folks. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Teresa. And we're so glad you're here from Virginia. What a fun addition. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
In the chat, we had David Allen from Clay, somewhat to not so fluent. Thank you, David. And I saw hand. Sherry.
So my name is Sherry Wareka. I work with USF with their Freshman Success Grant, just new to that position. But in the spring, I had some experience actually working at a high school. And I would say the biggest takeaway that I had is that in the high school, students still love to be recognized for doing good things. I mean, obviously they like it to be private, but even just as I, tried to motivate my students, I was 11th grade intensive reading, so they definitely were not feeling very successful about school, but just constantly reinforcing them and being specific, that made a big difference. And honestly, they would do a lot of things for Jolly Ranchers and even water.
Yeah, don't underestimate stickers, right?
Exactly. Smelly pencils, that was a big thing. Markers, colored pencils, colored pens. They love all the things you would think for elementary school, high schoolers, they really like them.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Sherry. And then we'll close out with the last 2 that are in the chat box, and feel free to add more. So Marianne from Monroe, I'm sorry, you can't unmute. I'd love to hear your sing-songy, smiley voice this morning, but she says, high school PBIS is lots more stepping stones and baby steps. Yep, as many teachers are still slow to accept rewarding kiddos. Thank you, Marianne. Glad you're here, Mayor. And then Rebecca from Santa Rosa, great to have you. And searching for buy-in is her 2 to 3 words. Great. I love that. So thank you. If you want to keep adding to the chat box, that's great for your participation. We are going to, for the sake of time, keep moving. And I'm going to pass it back over to Stephanie.
Thank you, Lauren. So this is our format today. As I said, we are using a format from the Behavioral Alliance of South Carolina, or the BASC. We started with our introductions, and now we're going to go into what we call a didactic period. And so what Lauren and I are do, we're going to share some different ideas from different things. So those objectives like data and reinforcement and expectations and rules, so that you can take some of those back. And then afterwards, we have someone from Leonard High School. They're on spring break today, so she may or may not join us, but we're going to present her information, and that's where we're going to get that engagement piece, where we're going to get some feedback from you about things that maybe Leonard High School could focus in on. And that'll be for about 20-25 minutes.
All right, so we're going to move into the brief overview of the skill or topic. So we kind of broke this into, if you think about the benchmarks of quality, or our BOQ, we have those 10 critical elements of implementation for PBIS. And what we really wanted to focus on are just pulling out a couple of those and focusing on that implementation at the high school level. So I'll start with the first one around teaming. And this is kind of your building block, your center stone, your cornerstone. You need to ensure, especially at that high school level, that the team members are really tailored to the needs of your unique high school. The beauty of PBIS across any grade level and implementation level is that it can fit, and it should be moldable and tailored to the needs of your school. So you really want to start there thinking about that team approach. Do you have the skill sets that are needed for your specific high school? Similarly, is a non-negotiable is to have that administrator. We know, and research has shown us, that if you do not have administrator buy-in, administrator commitment, then you really aren't going to be able to move forward. They're the person that helps with and understands that master schedule, the budgetary needs, the people needs, where can we put someone to support implementation of PBIS. They're that linchpin to help you understand where those go. So that administrator is certainly a non-negotiable, especially at the high school level. When we're doing teaming, we want to think about the data, not just to think about your students, but really to create the makeup of your team. Now, this might be a different way to think about using your data, but looking at your data to identify who else needs to be on the team. So, for example, if you're seeing an uptick this year in ninth graders having office discipline referrals, and yet you may be lacking in ninth grade teacher representation on your team, you'll want to use your data to say, we're getting a lot of office discipline referrals or behavioral referrals from our ninth grade. Let's go ahead and bring on some ninth grade teachers or staff. Similarly, if you're getting a lot of referrals in the cafeteria, and we might want to consider bringing the cafeteria staff, the cafeteria manager, someone in as a representative from the cafeteria in to problem solve those issues as well. So really look at your team and your data in a different way to ensure that equal representation for those needs are on the team. And then some other things to consider around non-negotiables at the high school. Schedule dates for meetings in advance. Have them on your master calendar. We know that even if things are on the master calendar, they have 50% chance that maybe they'll happen, but I would take that 50% chance that they'll happen over a 10 or 12% chance if they're not on that master calendar and scheduled out for the whole year. Much more likely to know that every third Thursday of the month is PBIS, and that's standard, and that's all throughout the whole school year. You're going to have a higher likelihood to ensure that those meetings are protected times. Include early warning data in your discussions. It's there for you to use. I think sometimes we forget about it. So looking at, especially in the high school, things like absences, tardies, looking at C's, D's, when we're even thinking about academics, because oftentimes they go hand in hand. So thinking about those early warning data pieces as well. Use your four-step problem solving process. And if you are unfamiliar with the four-step problem solving process, we have a ton of resources for you on the Florida PBIS website. And I know that a lot of you here today are district coordinators. So if that is a area that your district needs some more support on, please reach out to your technical assistance specialist, and we'll be sure to provide you some information around that four-step problem solving process. And then finally, come up with, as a team, team norms, and make sure you abide by them. So for example, if it's start on time, end on time, that might seem like a simple norm to do. And oftentimes we don't always do those things. So ensure that if we start at 9 o'clock, we start at 9 o'clock. So making sure that we are, as a team, coming up with agreed upon norms for one another, and then following through on those. And I also saw in the chat, so thanks, Mayor, from Monroe, communicating with middle schools, feeding into your high school on the cohorts upcoming. Some are great and others are going to be labor intensive. So that's a great way to use your team as well. And think about how can we get that information from their previous team, and feed into your team as well. Okay.
So the next piece, and I saw someone who put in there, they were here looking for buy-in. So thinking about that commitment, I'm going to touch on just a couple of these, but the big part is finding out what's motivating for your staff and what they want to work on. So I was working with a colleague in Maine, and we had a great discussion before she started working with high schools this year. And she went in and to ask that one thing that they wanted to focus in on this year, whether it's specific behavior, specific setting. And they all talked about attendance. So that was the thing that got that buy-in or that commitment from the faculty and staff. The other part of that is just making sure that when we're doing that, we're including input from everybody, but then actually then going back to our staff and showing them how they're using it. So we had the opportunity to work with a high school this year, Lauren and Sherry and I, and so we're showing them how what they have suggested has been used to make some modifications in the school. Our high schools are huge a lot of times into their mascot. So using that and building upon that. So there was a high school I worked with and they were the Wolves. So everything was around the Wolves. So instead of calling it school-wide expectations, they called it etiquette. That's just what they did. But it was school-wide expectations. It was 3 to 5 positively stated, applied to everyone everywhere. They just used the language a little bit different. Really emphasizing that we're trying to do some prevention for PBIS, and we're not necessarily always just going to be responding, but we want to try to prevent behavior from happening. And so that might be, we need to do some teaching of it. So we'll give some examples of teaching a little bit later and some different ways schools have done it. Now, the last thing we have done is sometimes PBS or PBIS is given a bad name for secondary schools. They think, oh, that's elementary, that's not for us. So some schools I've worked with, instead of the team calls it PBIS, they know it's PBIS, but school-wide, they just call it, this is how we're handling behavior and discipline on our campus as a way to get that kind of commitment and buy-in.
Okay. So here's just a quick example. So go ahead, Stephanie.
I was going to say, this is one of my favorites, so I don't mind. I'm going to jump over Lauren because I love this one. So this is a high school I had the opportunity to collaborate a little bit with. They're actually from California, but the reason I liked them, and you can see there's a link in the handouts that I'll hyperlink it to you, is that they have their expectations and they really believe in getting student voice in their expectations. So historically, they had the students involved with developing the matrix. But then what happened was after 4 years, they realized the initial group of students that developed the matrix were gone. And it was a whole group of students who are not involved. So that now they make it a point that every 4 years, they redo their matrix with the current students on campus. So at some point in time, all students do have the ability to get involved and give some feedback on that matrix. And so that's really why I wanted to showcase this one, and I love it. So they're using that for both their expectations, but also as a teaching tool and a student voice tool. So that's just why that example was showed.
And again, that is going to be in the hyperlinked in the slides for you. All right. And another example here around getting that buy-in or commitment is an example from Petoskey Pride. So this, again, I don't believe this one itself is hyperlinked, but we pulled a couple pieces for you. So the P for Pride is personal integrity. And for this high school, it's to be kind, take ownership, and maintain the honor code. And what we loved is what they did here is make this little lesson around it to gain some of that commitment piece to say, so what is belonging versus fitting in, and what's the difference? So really thinking about what is personal integrity at this school, belonging versus fitting in. And so I love this one because if you're a fan of Mean Girls, it's very fitting to see that the fitting in is this idea of being accepted, being liked, have to be like you to fit in, where they really want to focus on belonging as that idea of personal integrity. And what they did is carried this on and had some discussions and questions so that they really started to get folks to think about it for themselves. So this is a quick lesson around that personal integrity. These questions like, how might the choices made in high school regard fitting in and belonging impact individuals in the long run? So really getting people to think about pride as the high school expectations, not just being something that they do in high school, but that really shapes long run as well.
And just to piggyback on what Lauren was sharing about this one, they actually had the students really help to develop these lessons. They do them weekly, and they're short little PowerPoints, and the students put the questions in. Sometimes they do videos. So it's really developed with the students and for the students around those expectations.
Thank you, Stephanie. I just assume everyone knows that the students are doing that. So it's a really good piece to think about too. And that builds the commitment piece because you're getting the students involved, and then you're also getting some faculty and staff involved in creating the lessons, the weekly pieces, and helping them to hone in on that.
So we're not going to share and actually watch these for time's sake, but when we're talking about teaching, we've added in some additional ways to teach. So we had the matrix, we had those lesson plans. I love this video. This is one of my favorite all-time videos for high schools because we always know coming to class on time is a huge, huge issue in high schools. So in this one, they actually developed a video. It's called the Tardy Project. Now, you'll see their timestamp of 1:34:14. That was purposely put in there because the first is like an intro. So it talks about their expectations. And so fast forward to the 1:34 mark, and it shows Ben, who is a student who is demonstrating how you actually do have enough time to get between class to class if you make some wise choices. Do you stop at the water fountain? Do you hang out with the girls and chit chat? So it goes through and he models how you can transition between classes and still make it on time. And I think he actually makes it in early. So again, it's a YouTube video. Actually, you start at the 107 mark. I put the little at the top, and then Tardy Project. And the reason you start at 107, it does give a little bit of the explanation of it first, which is kind of nice. So love this one.
Yeah, it's pretty funny too. A good one to do. So similarly is the PBIS cash elevator. I wish we had more time to show these to you. This one you can is hyperlinked as well. Again, this is another way that students created this. It's kind of like what is the show?
Cash Cab.
Cash Cab, but Cash Elevator. And it was a speed round of questions around their school-wide expectations, rules, and another way to teach students in a way that is student run.
So the next one is when we talk about students, and I think Marianne brought this up about recognizing students, and sometimes there may be a struggle in high schools. This video was done many, many years ago, but one of the things that I really appreciate about this is a high school English teacher, and he explains how and why we should recognize students, and he makes the analogy to academics, and specifically in writing, and that when students are doing something phenomenal with their writing, we point out the good things they've done. in their writing. And then we say you should model the rest of your writing like you have done here. And so it's just pointed out we need to do the same thing with behavior. We need to point out when they're doing something good, maybe using behavior specific praise and reminding them that that's what they should be modeling throughout the day. So that's really why I like that one.
I love that one, especially if in high schools, if you're thinking about some of your potentially more resistant teachers or folks who aren't really seeing the need to teach or reinforce around behavior. And I think as Mary said, some people are slow to recognize behavior. This is a really nice example to show. Again, it is hyperlinked there for you because as Stephanie said, of the tie to academics. It gives a really nice example. And then I think our last one is the Bob Ross flash mob. Stephanie, do you want to talk? I know you love this one.
So this is just another example of recognizing and reinforcing students and finding out what they like. And a couple of years ago, Bob Ross became like a pop icon for whatever reason. So the kids had the opportunity to earn a reinforcement for doing Bob Ross. So you notice they got the wigs, they got the glasses, they got the painting, and so they turned it into a flash mob. So it's just another fun video watch. But again, it's going back to asking students and youth what's motivating for them. All stuff all the time, a little bit different than what we would think, but that's what was motivating.
Lots of happy little trees in that flash mob. Okay, and then there is one more here around the spinning wheel video. Again, thinking about how are we positively reinforcing our students. The biggest piece here is ensuring that we are asking, because especially at the high school level, I think sometimes we assume what the students would find reinforcing, and they may not. So it's really an important piece to think about that. There's an example here of a positive referral form. My thought around this positive referral form, this is a middle school example, is to make it look much more different than your typical actual behavioral referral form so that it's very easily recognizable that this is a positive referral. It's you caught being good, for example. Again, highlighting what expectation. So on this example, they have Cat's Pride. That's their school-wide expectations. So you can see which one they got, what one they're circled for, ensuring that this again looks different enough from your school-wide behavioral referral. And then it's tied to maybe that reinforcer as well. So you're not just getting a tangible reinforcer, but you're also tying it back to the verbal reinforcer to say why they're getting that. And hopefully, which is why we want to reinforce kids and adults, is so that we see that behavior continue. It should be used as a teaching tool.
Okay, so we've talked a little bit about teaming, identifying expectations and rules, teaching, reinforcing. Next is discipline systems. When we think about our secondary schools, they really are a lot of times more focused on the student code of conduct and what's the consequence when a student gets a referral, and more reactionary sometimes than sometimes our elementary schools. So some of the things that we have seen that have been working, going back to what's motivating for them, asking them, the staff, what are the problems they see and what are some of their ideas. Again, asking students the same thing. We had the opportunity, and I know Sherry was there a couple of years ago when we were asking students, if you were to get a referral to the office, what is something the office could do that would make you think twice about doing the behavior again? And we had some youth who have had quite often a lot of referrals, and they were like, nothing, there's nothing, there's nothing. And then we had two young men who actually did give ideas. One said home visits, and the kid next to him kind of lovingly punched him and said, don't tell him that. We don't want that. Well, that's the point. And then the other one said, find out, they called it that person. Who is that person for the student? And what they mean is the person that if they got a negative phone call about, they'd be very disappointed. They said it could be a parent, it could be an uncle, it could be a football coach, it could be another teacher, but finding that out and using that for discipline systems. Ask staff currently what's working and what's not working. So when I was teaching, if you had asked me if our in-school suspension was effective, sending students, I would have said absolutely not. And if you would have asked why, I would have had a host of reasons why. Here's another big one. This one I'm actually taking from a secondary alternative high school that I worked with in Dade County. They, at the end of every single 9 weeks, would pull discipline referrals and say, okay, here's something that happened on our campus that we never would have anticipated would have happened. Let's take some time and reflect after the fact how we handle the situation, and would we do it the same way or would we do it differently? And how does it impact our discipline flow chart for PBIS? And what do we need to change as a result of it? They did that at the end of every 9 weeks. And then what they would do is they would make revisions, they would redate the referral process, and then they would spend some time talking with staff about why it was changed and how it was changed, and because of the incident that did happen. And then the last thing is about, we hear the word consistency a lot. Staff, a lot of times, especially in secondary schools, say, we want to be consistent with our discipline. So one of the things that just we want to stress is consistency is not always doing the same thing for the same type of behavior, but always addressing it. So we may not always do the same thing when a student is tardy to class, but we will address it every single time. So getting people to understand that when we think about consistency, it's not always about getting the same, but it's more about how are we addressing it.
I think that's a really important piece. We talk about consistency a lot, and that often gets confused, right? Well, I love how Stephanie talks about that we're not necessarily doing the same thing all the same time, but we are always addressing it. And I think especially in our secondary settings, that's a really important piece. There's often so many different people dealing with behaviors that piece becomes really important. So here are some less intrusive responses. If you are a more veteran educator, these might be things that you say, well, yeah, of course we're doing these things, or of course that should be what we do in our classrooms. And what we're seeing is that we don't always have the same preparedness from our classroom educators. And so sometimes some of these things that we think are second nature or just kind of things we naturally would do are not the natural for everyone. And we may need to think about teaching our educators, our teachers, some of these skills, just like we would teach some of our students. And I think also, we talked about it a little bit, that sometimes there's a misconception about PBIS in the high schools and in secondary, but some of these they might think are more elementary. But let me tell you, if we just think about reteaching the behavior instead of automatically punishing, we may see behavior change. So one of the things I think is really important is that we actually really can't punish or shouldn't punish for behavior we haven't taught. So if we haven't taught the expectations, we can't assume that students will know how to meet them. So we really have to focus on teaching first, and then teaching, reinforcing, and then reteaching those behaviors, and not assuming that they know what the expectation is, and if they do, how to show that. So that's a really important piece. And I think the biggest one to start with is reteaching that behavior. Additional things to think about, and I know Sherry put it in the chat too, that some of their students said that they want to pay their time back. So give back of time is on here. So if they took 10 minutes of class time, then they have to give back 10 minutes of their time. Loss of privileges, those if-then or pre-MAC principle, if you do this, then you get that, is a pretty quick and behavioral change response. Again, that whole piece that we've really been focusing on is including student voice. So including a teacher and student developed plan on how to repair harm. So once harm has occurred between a student and a teacher, or even student and students within a teacher's classroom, coming up with a plan that has given voice and agency to all of the members of the situation that caused harm and the person who was harmed, then we can see a pretty quick behavioral change and move forward from that behavior issue. And then finally, one that's a little bit more work, but is still less intrusive than some of others, is behavior contracting. So having an explicit conversation with the student about the behavior that occurred, what happened to create the situation for the behavior, how can we change that antecedent, think about ABCs of behavior, antecedent, behavior, consequence, what happened prior to the behavior occurring, and the next time, what can we do to intervene then, so that we can hopefully prevent the behavior from happening. And if it doesn't and the behavior happens, what would the student do? So that consequence, what do they get? And how do you come to agreement through a formalized behavior contract period with the student? So those are some ideas. If you, especially the secondary schools and the high schools, aren't using some of these, we would invite you to think about what are some of these that you can add in or maybe refocus in your behavior matrix that are more or less intrusive for inappropriate behavior responses.
So we've gone through the introductions, we've gone through the didactic, and now we're going to go through the case study. Doesn't look like Katerina was able to join us today, but she gave us the information. So Lauren and I are going to present her information. The way that this will go is we'll present her information. We'll give you the opportunity to ask some clarifying questions, which we'll answer to the best of our ability. And then we'll give you participants an opportunity to share some different thoughts and ideas of things that maybe that the school could do.
All right, so I'm going to start by giving you a very kind of overview of Leonard High School. So Leonard High School is a fairly large school, a little over 2,000. So current enrollment is 2,375 students. There are 14% of their student body is identified as students with disabilities. They have a collegiate academy as one of the magnet programs within their school, so magnet within the high school. They are a PBIS implementation school, and so their PIC or PBIS implementation checklist, which is what we do every fall. At Tier 1 this previous year, they scored themselves at a 93% for implementation, and we'll show you that on the next slide as well. Some other pieces to consider here, their rates of office discipline referrals is 0.65. This is per 100. Rates of OSS is 0.08. So pretty good data here to look at. And then their graduation rate as of 2023 was 83%. And then they really revamped and refocused on PBIS in 23 to 24 school year. And you can see the improvement. They're looking at a graduation rate right now. Hopefully this is their anticipated at about 88%. So quite the improvement. And then their average daily attendance is just over 90%.
So that gives you a little bit about the demographic and the makeup of the school. With permission, we pulled their PBS implementation checklist and really just focused on Tier 1 because that has been their focus this year. So if you look at it overall, they have a 93%, but if you look across the different elements, I know it's a little bit hard to read, so I'll read a few of them to you. Their coaching and teaming is at 100%. Their faculty buy-in is about 90%. School-wide expectations and rules is around 88%. Rewards and discipline, 100%. Database decision-making is 90%. Training, so that's training the teachers, the staff, the faculty, the families, about 89%. With their lowest area coming in with their parent and community involvement at 75%. So it gives you a little bit of picture of where they are with their Tier 1 implementation.
And we asked her to break down some of the things around their current data. What's working for implementation just at that Tier 1 level again, because that has been their focus. So what's working in the last year, 81 teachers were enrolled. And what that enrolled means is explicitly had training. So that's what that means. So 81 teachers had training. They had active participation in PBIS. So be it in training, in rewards, in being visible, and all of their different activities. They had active participation by at least half. They are doing things for ongoing buy-in or commitment, and we're going to give you a couple of examples she's provided for us. And then they have seen some positive changes within the classroom. Classroom was a big focus for them, and in helping to get some of that faculty commitment as well as some of the student commitment. So those are some of the big pieces kind of overarching, and we're going to get in to a little bit more based on the elements now. So this is kind of that overview of implementation at tier 1, what has been working for them.
So you can see here, those were just some big pictures. So then we asked for this high school, what are some things that are working and not working by their tier 1 elements? So one of the things that they said was their teaming. You notice they had 100%, and they said that they meet the 4th Tuesday of every month. So that is scheduled and booked, and it happens. Their AP for student affairs is their contact and attends every single meeting. They're actually working on a book study. So don't suspend me. It does build in some restorative or relationship building practices. It builds in some ways to handle behavior when it does occur. So it's got a little bit of that, some alternatives to suspension. They are aware of the problems on campus. So they're using their data to know what's going on, and they're analyzing that data monthly. They have expectations, and they're posted on campus, and they actually have a schedule of rewards that are planned for the school year. Now, one of the things that they are attempting to do this year that isn't working as well is that they're not getting 100% of staff buy-in with using Class Dojo. And that's what they decided they were going to use for their reinforcement system this year.
And I'll add a little bit here too. I do support this district that Leonard is in, and so I get to interact with them quite a bit. And they really have an incredible, not only their AP support, their principal is very, very bought in. Their principal is making the announcements every week. Their principal is visible, is at meetings when she can be. Their principal is also a part of all of the pieces that the team is doing, which is really great, an additional piece. So while not always at all of the meetings, is still there as that support system, both visibly and also verbally, to reinforce that this is what we're doing, this is why we want to do it. The Class Dojo is new this year, and so they're definitely some bumps in the road to get that commitment or buy-in on it. And so they're seeing some issues within that as well. So we know that she's not with us today, so we can certainly try to answer some clarifying questions that you might have. So we'll pause. If you have, you can do the raise your hand button. There's a little way to show you how to do that, or you can type a question in the chat box. So if you have any clarifying questions, again, we'll try to answer those for you. And I'll practice my wait time here.
Oh, thank you, David. David just brought up a good point. It's not necessarily a clarifying question, but something to consider is that teachers complain all the bad kids get recognized and the good for the tickets and bucks, and all the good kids rarely or never get anything. I suggest that the implementation of rewards may be lacking fidelity. Okay. And I see David has his hand raised. Do you want to share something, David, or ask something?
Hey, can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, it's I'm new to this role and I'm loving it. I had the fortunate blessing of stepping in when my predecessor left to join FLPBIS. So PBIS is pretty robust in Clay for the most part. But what I run into a lot, or especially in the high school level, is just what I just said. And these are teachers who either like buy in or they've slacked on their participation because they see, quote unquote, all the bad kids getting the rewards or the bucks and being recognized, and all the good kids for nothing. And that's emblematic to me of a system that's not being made, the rewards part of the system, that part of the scaffolding. The system can be tailor-made to any school or situation. It's not a one size fits all by any means. So maybe in their rollout, to implement PBIS, especially tier one in high school, that maybe the way in which rewards are given or scoped out it wasn't really was maybe left to be autonomous to a certain degree. And then that's where you see a lot of inconsistency. I don't like the idea of telling teachers what they can or cannot do with it, but maybe a more consistent set of suggestions and guidelines for that. I don't think you're going to please 100% of a staff with that. Um, but when they use that tactic, I should say, about what I just mentioned about the rewards part of it as just an excuse to wipe away PBIS altogether. And I said, hold on now, you're an educator, you're a smart person. You can't argue with empirical level research. This isn't, we're not using PBIS based on what we found on some tertiary resource or Wikipedia. You know, you can't argue with that. What we got to look at and examine is the fidelity of the implementation of the reward system and how can we make that element of it more robust and fair across the board so that it at least becomes, or the appearance of it on optics becomes more consistent.
Right.
Great points, David.
And I love Marianne, since she doesn't have her microphone, she's really using access to the chat box. So I just wanted to point out that she asked some really good clarifying questions. So the first one was the length of time for implementation. And Lauren knows that they've been on and off for 8 years, but really focused over the last 2 years. So that was a good clarifying question. And then also she had more questions about the book study. So who participates? Is it all students, just a part of the magnet school? And so Lauren said it's the book studies for the team and the whole school's implementing PBIS.
Yeah, great clarifying question around that. So they do have a magnet program, and that magnet program participates in the same school-wide PBIS framework. So there isn't a separate one. They don't get their own. They are also participating in it, and that's across all and inclusive of their students with disabilities. So on that first slide, I think it was the 14% of students with disabilities enrolled, and at Leonard, they are also accessing all levels, especially at that tier one level, which has been their focus. So all students are within that. You're welcome. Great clarifying questions.
Great. So we're going to practice another maybe 15-second wait time to see if anybody else wants to raise their hand asking for a clarifying question or type anything in the chat box.
Do I see a hand up, or is that a leftover hand?
No, it's my hand again.
Oh, okay, good.
Okay.
Go right ahead, David. I couldn't tell.
I don't know if it's a clarifying question. I've got, I'm the district coordinator here in Clay for PBIS. We're on spring break this week, but I'm 12-month. So I'm here. I'm juggling some other hats while this meeting's going on. I don't know if this is the time, but I found this book called, I don't know if you can see that. It was just published this year. I know it's got one of those words in it that maybe we don't use in presentations. It's called Creating Equitable Practice in PBIS, Growing a Positive School Climate for Sustainable Outcomes. It goes along with everything y'all are talking about. I just started reading it. It's like, because high school is not where my forte is for PBIS. I'm secondary primarily in my 30 plus years doing this, but mostly at junior high, middle school, and some at elementary. So everything you guys are tacking on right now is really hitting everything I'm reading about in this book. And
Awesome.
I think you guys are just doing a fantastic job, and these TA chats are phenomenal. They're a great help.
Thank you. And then David, who wrote the book? Could you let people know the authors if they can want to find it easily?
The authors are Nicole Y. Hollins Sims, Erica J. I could probably type this in the chat better, and Timothy J. Runge.
Okay.
It's an Eye on Education book, and it was just published this year, 2023. So it's very new, very relevant. But it's an easy read. I mean, it's got big print pages. It's not one of these, Encyclopedia Britannica.
I love a good big print page.
Yeah, and it makes it easy to read. But I think in a day where, because when I go to one of our schools that has a more challenging implementation level because of what they're dealing with, maybe with they have more challenging behaviors than some other schools do. Let's put it that way. PBIS is a scaffolding system. It's adaptable. It's not a one size fits all thing. So I might need to chunk out a little bit more here and chunk out this part of tier one, maybe even pull a secret from tier two. But this takes all of that and gives some recommendations to kind of get meatier with some of the tier one stuff in those types of challenging situations.
I love it. David, would you put that I know others would love to see it. Would you put the title and the authors in the chat box for folks?
Absolutely. I'll do
Thank
that right now.
you.
You're welcome.
And I know Rebecca asked a great clarifying question. What made them decide to use Class Dojo school-wide? And I will have to get the specifics back for you. I don't know why they chose that one specifically, but the one that they were using was no longer supported by the district and the state. So they had to make a change. And I'm not sure what made them choose that one specifically. But great clarifying question. And we can certainly get that back to you as well.
Great. So I think we're going to the next part. So we have about 10 minutes left. So what we want to know from everybody, we've heard from a couple people today. We want to hear from a lot more. If you were to have a conversation with the school and make some recommendations, what are some of the tier one elements that you would recommend that they work on? And what are some ideas that you have based on your experience working in high schools or other schools and things that could translate to a high school?
So again, if you want to write them in the chat, that's great. If you want to unmute, you also are welcome to do that.
I'm going to practice my wait time, and then I'm going to maybe ask a clarifying question to see if people have ideas. Okay, so one of the things that, oh, we've got one, and then I'll ask my question. Ensuring that the tier one systems are implemented with fidelity across the school campus and community. So that was
so
one
maybe we would
suggestion.
ask, how are you ensuring, right? What is the elements of fidelity that you're using to look at? And what does fidelity mean, right? What are we looking at when we're thinking about that fidelity? So great. Thank you, Portia. Awesome piece to consider. Oh, we got another one.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca. She said maybe add some flexibility in reward planning so they can adjust based on needs and interests identified during the school year. I know we talk about elementary school students, their interests fluctuate so much throughout the school year, depending what school changes. Our secondary students are the same exact way. So building in some of that flexibility. I remember, and Sherry knows the school because it was in the district where she was in, but one of the coolest things I saw is they had a huge student population of kids who were into basketball. And March is March Madness time. And I can remember being out there, and during March Madness, the kids would have the opportunity to buy the opportunity at lunch to go watch March Madness games in one specific classroom. And that's something that fluctuates because, unlike football, they're not necessarily the weekend and on nights. There's a lot during school. I know my son would have loved that when they were doing the World Cup for soccer.
Oh yeah, that would have been really cool. So gauging your students, right? Understanding what's happening. It may not be a sports, it might be a specific show, or it might be an event that's happening. But getting some of those little pockets of students may get them to impact their rewards or their reinforcers. Otherwise, they might not have. Marianne, picking a coach for the high school level is of paramount importance. The person needs to be flexible in schedule. And oftentimes that teacher is not your best idea. So great. Yeah, actually this school has, and Katrina, who's not able to be here, but she is what they call a CCRT, or a climate culture resource teacher. And although she is teacher in her title, she does not have a classroom. So her main role is implementation of PBIS and MTSS and understanding the data and helping to teach and prevent. So that's exactly that they thought about that within the high school and they picked that coach purposely. So I love that you brought that up. Mir, thank you so much.
Okay, so now I'm going to ask my question. So we have a couple more minutes left. If you remember when we showed the slide on the pick, their lowest area was family and community involvement, which is not uncommon that we see in schools and especially secondary schools. So I was just wondering if anybody had some ideas and suggestions for parent and community involvement around PBIS for the high school.
Like this is always a sought after question, Stephanie. People always want to know what we can do to better engage our families, our parents, and our community. So if you're doing something great or something that's working, please share that with us as well.
So Mayor can't talk. So while people are typing, I'm going to assume people are typing. I'm going to share an idea or something that one of her point of contacts did and one of the keys at a high school. She actually went out, not that it's all about reinforcement, but she went out and sought companies to help with their reinforcement. And so one of the things that they did was they got a lot of money and they used it for turnaround kid and also for staff. So they would recognize kids who had turned it around. So maybe it was a student whose average daily attendance was 30%. Now they were up to 60%. Or maybe they brought their grade point average up to a 2.0 that was below a 2.0. So that would be one way. And so they would get it and would be a good connection so the parents can see that their child is being recognized for changing their behavior. And every time it was sponsored by, the specific community, which was really nice. So that was one way. And I think we got some other stuff
Mayor
in there.
actually added to that, which was great. I knew she was furiously typing over there. So for any meeting the parent is supposed to attend at the school and they show up, so, got to get them there, they get a Publix gift card. That's awesome. And then we had Sherry share, not necessarily an answer, but she heard at APBS they refer to this group as caregivers. Several of her students did not live with a mom or dad, but often another family member. So a great reframe as well to think about that as caregivers.
And then Portia talks about having a family engagement night where parents can learn more about PBIS and behavioral strategies that can be implemented at home. The engagement meeting providing opportunities for prizes, different things like that. One of the things that would be helpful too, we were talking to a high school and some parents are now struggling with the fact that everything is online for submissions and checking grades. At the end of first semester for our freshmen, knowing what their credit is and how to pull transcripts. So building that in would be another thing that supports students. Like, come learn about PBIS, want to know how to find out what your child's grades are. How do you read a transcript? How do you know if they're on track for graduation? So combining those would be another thing for a great family night.
And I know no one has shared this, but we actually did this when I was in the classroom. Similarly, when we had a family engagement night, when we did anything that we asked families to come in for, they could earn family bucks. And their family bucks were worth more. So if a student buck was worth $1, family bucks were worth $5. And those family bucks they could get for answering a phone call, answering an email, coming in and volunteering, returning something that the student needed, showing up at parent-teacher conference night. So lots of different ways to earn those parent bucks. And then we twice a year, we had a parent store. in conjunction with our opening family engagement night or report card night. And so you had to show up in order to come to the family store. And we had things donated by the local community, which was a really fun way to get people involved. And if the parents or families were not able to do that, then the students could actually use their family bucks, and they were worth more in the student store as well. So they could earn them for that too. So just another way to think about that.
I like Mary, and she also had a suggestion too. She's specific to their district. They have a huge demographic of students who are Haitian and Creole, so having a family thing that is centered around that demographic. So if you know there's a huge demographic at your school, maybe doing something catered and specific so the demographic feels welcomed and that there's something specific for them.
Awesome. Yeah, family bucks. Awesome. Different way to do it. So we have about a minute left. We will end here with just a huge thank you to all of you to be here. We know that this was a new way to think about doing the TA chats through that ECHO model. So thank you for participating and being with us here through it. It was a great discussion and lots of great ideas shared. So we really appreciate